Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When this budget was presented to Cabinet, the Tory leader's response was, "You should have known, you should have seen it coming." Well, perhaps we should have heeded Mrs. Thatcher when she promised to roll back the frontiers of the state. But she didn't complete the exercise. Cameron and May stated their intention of reducing state expenditure as a proportion of total expenditure to 1930s pre-welfare state levels of 36 to 37%. Post-1945, governments have spent on average about 41% of total expenditure, when there was a consensus that the welfare state was permanent. Thatcher consciously reduced health, education and local government spending, and it took a Labour government to repair the damage. The Tories subsequently have systematically cut public expenditure down to 1930s levels, so that this year it's 37%, a 4% cut in all national expenditure, a 10% cut in government expenditure, and thus we have a crisis in the prison service, a crisis in the health service, a crisis in social care, a growing crisis in school budgets, and as the government white paper says, a broken housing service. But local government has taken a 30% cut in central government support since the Tories took office, and to add to that difficulty, they've spread the pain unevenly so that metropolitan districts and London boroughs have had a 40% cut, whilst wealthy Tory shires experience cuts of between 15 and 20%. Some shire districts have hardly been touched, such as Witney, Cameron's local authority, Maidenhead, the Prime Minister's, and most recently, of course, Surrey, who, as we know from misdirected texts, got a sweetheart deal from the government. The public are angry and have every right to feel outrage by cuts that threaten every service they receive from the council. I'm sure they're not aware that they're being discriminated against because they are northern and urban, and because every northern metropolitan district is having the same experience of wondering which will go bankrupt first. I'm sure they're not aware that Yorkshire gets £300 per capita to spend on transport infrastructure, in contrast with £850 in the South East and £1,250 in London. It is discriminatory, it's unfair, but also it's stupid. It impoverishes whole regions of the country. It means that we become more, not less, dependent on the rich South East. It's an insane economic strategy. They try to hide their bias by stating that they fund all local authorities on the same basis, consciously ignoring differential needs, ignoring the fact that those local authorities responsible for adult and childcare are facing an explosion of demand at one end of the scale and swingeing central government cuts at the same time. When every news bulletin tells the government of a national funding crisis in care, they allow local authorities to raise council tax by 3%. This barely puts a sticking plaster over the problem and forces the poorest authorities to raise a regressive tax, which in our case nowhere near solves the problem. And to put the problem into perspective, the care element of our budget accounts for more than 2/3 of our expenditure. So the small percentage increase in income is covering a huge black hole in council finances. The gap is so great that given this level of demand for care service and what government tell us we can expect for the next 3 years, the only issue is which authority goes bust first and when will it happen to us. I've been involved in local government for 40 years, including the Thatcher years, and I've seen nothing remotely like this. The Tories are intent on eliminating local government. This budget, our budget, is an attempt to try and keep it alive. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.